Hello and welcome to part 5 of my series on how to calculate. In this particular game I'm going to look at why it's so important to check all your variations and why it's such a big mistake to skirt over variations too quickly and in general just to play too quickly in critical positions. So in this game I'm playing against the British Grandmaster Glenn Fleer, and this is played in Hastings, which was played a few weeks ago. And I'm black, so the game went like this. Now this is the first time I played the Benko defence as black. In general, you know, I tend to move around a lot against d4. I used to play the Grunfeld a lot, then I sort of switched to the Nimzo. But one of the things I found when I play the sort of Nimzo Queen's Indian setups is they're not very dynamic. And I've always considered myself to be a dynamic player. So recently I've been trying to sort of force myself to try and play more dynamic positions, because I think you should play for your strengths. I think it's a really bad mistake to play, you know, if you're a dynamic player, you shouldn't be playing like Queen's Gambit Decline, for example. You should be playing openings which more suit your style. And I say, I'm a very tactical player, I'm a very good counter-attacking player. So I thought, you know, I'll play the Benko. And as that's a good sort of a good counter-attacking opening, and it's an opening that's really been adopted by many strong grandmasters. In fact, Magnus Carlsen himself has played this opening. So my opponent played d5. I played b5. He took. I went a6. He took. Yeah, this is why I went g6. Now, the normal way to play, generally speaking, for black is to take on a6. And after knight c3, g6, g3. The main line is for white to fianchetto the bishop. And we get some sort of position like this. Castles. So this is really like the main line of the Benko defence. But I played a game recently. Again, it was at the Isle of Man tournament. I played this young German player called Forben. He had a strange name called Forben Koop. And he's quite a sort of strong, sort of 18-year-old player. And actually, one of the things that struck me when I played him is when we went for the post-mortem, how mature he was for his age. You know, it's like talking to someone about 10 years more older than me, basically. And he basically played this system with g6 against me, and I really didn't have a clue what I was doing in the opening. So, you know, for the time being, I continued playing the same moves as Glenn did. Yeah, then we get this position after Queen a5. Now, actually, if we just go back a move, most of my preparation for Glenn was spent on the move e5 in this position. And after knight e8, white plays knight f3, black plays d6, white takes, black takes back with a knight. This was most of my preparation, and probably the position is just unclear. But, you know, I felt sort of comfortable in what I was doing. Now, this is obviously one of the problems that black has to face. If he's delaying taking on a6, he potentially allows this e5 move, and also after knight e8, one can also contemplate the move f4. But, you know, based on my analysis, I reasoned that black was perfectly okay after e5. Of course, Glenn doesn't do this. You know, he goes for knight f3. He's a clever, sort of experienced player. He's not just going to play the same lines he's played before. He's going to sort of try something different. So after knight f3, I played queen a5. Now, this is an interesting moment, because when I was white against this German kid at the Isle of Man, I sort of thought, well, you know, he's attacking my pawn on e4. I want to try and develop and castle kingside. What's the most natural move to do that? The most natural move is bishop d3, happy days. If he takes on a6, I simply go to castles. Well, surely this is good for white. Now, I went for a little walk. Around the tournament hall, feeling really confident, you know, sort of like go for a little shimmy, go for a coffee, have a little stroll, you know, walking around the tournament hall looking really smug. I come back to the board, and my opponent's taken on d5. He's gone knight takes d5. I'm like, what the hell is sort of a move is this? I'm like, so as soon as I see it, I sit down and I'm, oh my God. You know, it suddenly dawns on me what's happening. And the problem is that after e takes d5, bishop takes c3, white's in a whole heap of trouble. Now, the interesting thing about this trap was that Boris Gelfand himself fell into this trap against Magnus Carlsen, the rapid play game. I think this was tournament in Monaco. And Gelfand actually reacted quite badly because probably the only move is the move I played against Torben Koop, knight d2. But Gelfand actually took the bishop on c3 and after queen takes. Now, of course, if you go bishop d2 here, I take on d5. I'm doing very well. The pawn on d5 is on prise, pawn on a6 is on prise. The white king can't easily castle. If he goes something like this, then we have completely lost position for white. And the other move, of course, is queen d2, but after queen a1, this is what happened in the Gelfand game. Castles, bishop takes a6. Gelfand was not able to prove enough compensation for the exchange because, for example, after bishop b2, black can simply take, and if you go queen c3, I can play f6, and if you go queen h6, I can take on b2, knight g5, queen g7. So this is quite a clever trap, and it was interesting that Magnus Carlsen gave his seal of approval to Black's position in this particular opening, or he basically gave his seal of approval to this opening, this way of playing as Black by delaying castling. But of course, I realised, you know, at the board that it's not a rapid play game. You know, I mean, it's quite embarrassing actually when you're sat there and you think, well, actually my position's lost already. We're only about 10 minutes into the round in a long play game, in a long play tournament, and already I'm getting humiliated with white. This is quite embarrassing, you know, I'm close to tears. So I went knight d2. Actually, at this position, I think my opponent should have taken on a6. And after bishop takes a6, played bishop takes d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes a6. And I think black is clearly better here because, again, white has problems with castling. And if he plays queen e2, well, black can probably go in for quite a nice endgame. And just in general, I mean, it's like a Benko, but white has just lost one of his central pawns, which is obviously a very important. You know, it's basically just a Benko where white has lost his central pawn on d5, on e4, as it turns out. So obviously, just cannot be good for white. I mean, the move. I think the move he played in the game was bishop g7. Sorry, was bishop g7 in this position, which was perfectly okay. It's only later on that he made a mistake where he should have been clearly better, and he allowed me to escape with a draw. So this is a very interesting trap, and the reason I was attracted to play this variation against Glenn was because I played this variation on chess.com, on a site called chess.com, and at Blitz Chess. It was amazing how many players fell for this bishop d3, knight takes d5 trap. It's not an obvious trap at all. In fact, the move that white should play in this position probably, well, he's got two moves. One move is play a7, which is rather a subtle move, but the most natural move probably is simply to play bishop d2, bishop takes a6, and then bishop e2. And I think that white is slightly better. In fact, I do seem to recall this guy, Torben Koop, having a game recently against a Chinese woman grandmaster. Sorry, I think she's a full grandmaster. She's rated about 25-50, and I think he lost with black. So you could argue here that white is still slightly better. But none of this occurred in the game, of course. after queen a5, Glenn played a move which completely took me by surprise, knight d2. And I was rather kicking myself for not analysing this move before the game. Fortunately, for the time being, I was able to find the right moves. I took, he took. He played a4. Of course, he simply wants to put the knight on b5 and then castle kingside. So I've got to try and go for some counter. If I play d6 after knight b5, well, I don't even have time for knight d7 because he's threatening knight c7. So I've got to waste a move with some rather pointless move like queen b7, and then he castles. And it looks like white's clearly better here because I don't really have the normal sort of counterplay that black has in the Benko after knight a6, rook e1, knight b4, knight c4. This looks very good for white. Black cannot play e6, the breaking move, because d6 is on prise. So all this looked rather depressing. So I decided to go for immediate counterplay with a move e6, which I think was probably the best move. Now, he took on e6. Another possible line is to go knight b5 and try and win material immediately. But in fact, as he said after the game, Glenn, after e takes d5, knight c7, well, black can play a move like queen b7 or queen c6, and after knight here, d takes e4. The position is very unclear. Yes, he's won the exchange, and yes, he's got this passed a pawn. But on the other hand, I'm going to have a very strong centre after something like castles d5. You know, maybe the knight will go to d7. I'll take on a8 with a rook even, so I didn't have to put the queen on a8. And in general, this is just a very unclear position. Anything can happen. White's up an exchange, but again, I'd say black has a very strong centre, and if you try and undermine it with a move like f3, then you might run into even more trouble after a sequence like this. So this is something that, you know, generally speaking, like Glenn is a very solid positional player. He's a very good player. You know, probably his most famous result was coming in as a reserve. I think in was it the Lloyd's Bank? It was some famous tournament that he won in the 1980s when he was completely unheralded, and he wasn't expected to win. I don't think it was Lloyd's Bank. I think it was some other tournament. But basically came in and he basically blew everyone away, blew the whole field away, you know. And it was a really famous result and a really famous win for an underdog. But yeah, Glenn's, you know, a very strong positional player. And I think he doesn't like going for these wild complications. So instead of knight b5, he simply took on e6. I took back the pawn. And now he went knight b5. I went queen c6, queen e2. I went d5. He castled. Again, we get to a critical moment. I didn't want to take on e4 with a pawn, for example, because I thought he would simply go knight c4. Yes, I regained my pawn, which is a good thing, but unfortunately the pawns on e6 and e4 are very weak. Potentially they can become targets if white simply goes rook e1 and bishop g5. And I don't really have any active counterplay here. You know, I'd like to put a knight in the centre with knight d5, but that simply drops the e-pawn. So this is something I really want to avoid. You know, your first instinct is to gain back your pawn, but black's main advantage in this position is the fact that he's got these strong centre. He's got these pawn on d5 controls squares, pawn on d4 controls a lot of squares. So you should try and keep that centre together. Now, this is where I should have played the move knight a6. When I discuss this position later on with the English Grandmaster Mark Hebden, his sort of like profound understanding of these kind of positions came to the fore, because he immediately suggested, why don't I put the knight on a6? And I think he's absolutely right. Now, the main point of this is, if white continues like he did in the game, with rook a3, I may simply be able to play a move like knight b4. And I think the knight is very well placed on b4 because it really ties white's position down. He can't really move the rook away because a4 is hanging. if he plays a move like b3, well, the rook is rather shut out of the game. And this becomes an important point later on as well, because I played the move knight bd7, which is also playable. You know, what I want to play, my basic plan is to play c4 and knight c5. And then try and bring the knight around to d3 while I create very active counterplay against the white position. And I could also play c4 and knight e5. That's another way of reaching d3. But generally that's my plan. I wasn't totally comfortable about this position though, because I thought, well, because I've played e6, my king is slightly more exposed than in many lines of the Benko. So white has more active counterplay. And in fact, this is something that came back to haunt me, because Glenn played a good move, rook a3. Now, the interesting thing about this game was, I was sat here at the board, and I'm playing the Benko, which I've never ever played before in a proper game. Yes, I played it on Blitz. It's possible that Glenn checked. But Glenn, plays all these moves really quickly and confidently. And he sat there at the board with this really sort of bored expression. I mean, like I say, Glenn's a lovely guy, nice guy, but it was kind of annoying to me during the game that I've played this and I've never played before. And my opponent somehow just seems to know everything about it. It's only after the game that I discovered that apparently he writes he covers the Benko for chesspublishing.com. And not only that, but he also actually had a game in this exact variation a few months ago in the French League. It's a game I wasn't aware of because it wasn't on the database. So, you know, it was kind of a double whammy for me. Not only did my opponent sort of was kind of an expert on this opening anyway, but he'd also had a game in this particular variation. So it was a real problem. And you know, it's around about this point where I really should have started thinking about the position. I should have really, I'd used up quite a lot of time, but I should have, I probably had about sort of 40 or 50 minutes left at this point. I really should have spent some more time here as well, because this is a really crucial position. And because my opponent was ahead on the clock, he was playing very quickly and confidently. He was, like I say, he was sitting there almost with this bored expression of, get on with it, I just want to finish you off. But I should have ignored all that and just sort of spent a bit more time on the position. Now, the first move I instinctively wanted to play was the move c4. And the idea of c4, like I say, this was one of my plans, was to bring the knight around to c5. Now, when I was analysing, I thought, well, I go c4, plays knight d4. This is how I was thinking during the game. I don't analyse very quickly. It's not like I go c4, knight d4, blah, 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 blah. I go c4, he goes knight d4. I analyse very slowly, really. And I thought, well, if I go queen b6, so if I go queen d6, he takes on d5 and goes queen e6 check. And then we get this ending. And I thought, well, this is the last thing I want. He's got these sort of, he's a pawn up, but suddenly I've got all these dark square weaknesses, and it's an end game, so I've got no real chances of launching a counter-attack against his king. So I thought so basically I got to this position, and I didn't bother to look any further. Now again, this is where I should be checking my variations, because after knight d4, in fact, after c4, white should take first, and then play knight d4. So then queen d6 retransposes this variation. But the point is that after knight d4, black is not obliged to play queen d6. He can play queen b7 first. And after queen e6, rook f7, queen c6, black has again quite a powerful move in this position. He can play knight e5. And after queen b7, rook b7. Yes, we've got an endgame, but this is a good endgame for black. The knight is aiming for d3. If b3, there may be tactical problems. Possibly just knight d3, and then something like this may well be causing white a problem. And just in general, this whole variation is fine for black. So really I sort of panicked here, rather than spending my time working out c4, whether it worked or not. I rushed through it too quickly. I played another move. I played knight h5, which wasn't so successful. Now my opponent played knight f3, which is a very good move. Again, the point, he doesn't worry about me taking on e4 because he's ready to play knight g5. And this is a critical moment where I spent too little time. Now in Hastings, I was going out a lot, I was drinking a lot. You know, I wasn't really taking the chess as seriously as I should have done. You know, I should have really just gone back to the room after the game, spent 3 or 4 hours analysing the games, preparing for my next round, going to bed, and doing the same thing the next day. But of course, once you finish your game, the temptation is to go down the pub, have a few beers with your mates, especially if you've had a bad result, and gradually over the course of a few nights just starts to catch up with you. So I'm sat there at the board and I'm feeling rather anxious anyway because of all this booze inside me. And you know, again, like, it's very difficult to analyse and it's very difficult to calculate in these sort of situations because your tendency is just to make a move. Your tendency is you don't want to sit there and think. You just want to play instinctively. So the instinctive move I felt was knight f4. Now, when I was sat there at the board, I was thinking if I go knight f4, he takes, rook takes, he goes rook e3. Well, we can look at that variation. After knight f4, bishop takes, rook e3, he plays d4. I played d4 rather. And I thought, well, I'm fine. If he moves his rook, e4's hanging. Happy days. But the point is that he could simply take on d5, and in fact this is what happened in the game. Now, if I'd have bothered to actually sat there and check this variation, I would have seen that he can actually throw in e takes d5. And this is why checking your variations I think is so important. You've got to sit there, and you've got to check everything. Because if you just play into a variation too quickly, like I did in this game, it can backfire on you horribly. You're going to end up missing stuff. You're going to end up missing important stuff. If I'd seen this variation where he takes first, which is a very simple variation, so it wouldn't have taken long for me to check it. If I'd have checked this variation, for sure I would have seen e takes d5 first and then rook e3. But because I didn't check it, I missed rook e3. So always check your variations. So here, probably what I should play actually is the move knight b6, force b3, and then again the rook is out of play. Now the knight on b6, for example, is not as well placed as, say, it would have been on b4 maybe, but there's also possibilities of maybe playing c4, trying to undermine this and making a4 weak. So I think the game would have been still in the balance, but the problem is after I went knight f4, he whizzed out e takes d5 and rook e3, and I'm sat there, oh my god, what have I done to my position? Because the problem is I suddenly realised if I take on a4, we get this kind of variation. Rook e6, queen b7, knight d6, queen a6, rook e8 check, rook takes e8, queen takes e8. And this looks really horrible for black. Okay, maybe it's not losing immediately, but it looks very, very dangerous to allow this knight to come to d6, the queen to penetrate into the position. So it just generally looks very, very dangerous for black. I thought I can't allow the rook to come to e6, but then I'm not getting my counterplay that I wanted in the game. If I play passively, if I go knight f8, which in fact I think that's the move I played, then I've lost all chances of taking over the initiative. So basically, just by not checking that variation with knight f4, it really cost me the game because now I'm under pressure. Glenn played b3, I went c4, desperately trying to gain some sort of counterplay. I think here he should have gone rook c1, which would have been a very strong move. And probably black's position will fall apart in a few moves. I'm a pawn down. I don't really have any active counterplay. He's got a safer king because he's got an extra pawn on the king's side. Generally, it's a terrible position for black. But he played a slightly sloppy move, which was g3. I think that was quite a big mistake because now my resource my resourcefulness kicked in. I thought, well, you know, I can't play passively here. I've got to counter attack against the position. Came out with a move d4, which is a good move. And that rather took him by surprise, I think, because the point is, if I take here, position's not so clear. Yes, he can take with the queen on e3, but then maybe I've got a move like maybe rook e8, for example. And position is suddenly becoming very complicated. So yeah, I counterattack d4. Now, yeah, it's possible that taking on f4 was good for black, but was good for white rather. But after some thought, Glenn came out with quite a strong idea. He took on d4. And now the idea is, if black takes on d4 with a rook, you simply take, and then we go rook e4. And this works out very well for white, because if I move the bishop back, c4 is dropping. So of course I didn't like this variation, so I took with the bishop on d4. He took on f4. I took on e3. He took with the queen. Now again, this is a situation where I should have spent more time. My first instinct when I calculated this variation earlier was to take on b3, and after queen takes b3, play queen e6. And I thought, well, actually, this doesn't look that bad for black. I'm only a pawn down. Well, I'm 2 pawns down, but his pawns are doubled on the king side. So one of his extra pawns isn't really that relevant. And after queen e6, now if he tries to keep queens on with queen f3, well, e4 is dropping. So the natural continuation is to take, knight takes, and then go rook a1. Now I saw the move rook a5, and then I was calculating this variation. I thought rook a5. Now if I take on f4, then he plays a5. This is something I want to avoid. I don't want to allow his pawn to get to a7, then it's going to be end of game very quickly. So I've got to play a good defensive move here. Rook a5 is a good defensive move. So the idea is to go knight c5. But then I thought, well, what happens if he goes knight d6, knight f4, knight b7? Well, he's just going to run his pawn down anyway. You know, and then I stopped there and I thought, well, I'm not interested in that, you know. But the point is that, in fact, after knight d6, again, is a variation that I missed, which is just to go knight c5 anyway. And forget about the f-pawn, and just take on a4. So again, this is poor calculation by black. So I really should have gone into this endgame, but I was actually sat there thinking, I was thinking too wishy-washy. I thought, you know, maybe, you know, Glenn's made like a couple of mistakes lately. Maybe, you know, maybe this is the trend now. He's going to start falling apart. Yes, he's got his good own, he's got his preparation. Glenn's famous for his preparation. But what about his technical part of his game? It doesn't seem so good. So, because of that, I started thinking really stupid. I might be able to play for a win, which is an absolute ridiculous. From this position, to think that black might be able to try and win this position is just absolutely ludicrous. I should have been trying to bow out to a technically drawn ending. So I went rook e8, which is a really stupid move. He played a nice move, queen c1. I went queen f1, queen f3. He took. I went nice. Now Glenn came out with a very good move here because, again, it looks as if black is, you know, potentially. Well, I mean, I'm threatening an immediate perpetual check starting with queen g4. So, for example, if he goes knight c7, I'll go queen g4, king h1, queen f3 check, king g1, queen g4 with a draw. So he hasn't got time for knight c7. But Glenn came up with a nice tactical idea, and again, this shows why he's a good player, really, because this really killed me completely. After this move, I could resign. The move he played was the move f5. Just killing any counterplay. Any ideas of me playing queen g4 are just killed stone dead. And again, I think this is an example, when you're playing against good players, they're much more ruthless when they're better. I think maybe a weaker player may have allowed me to escape with a draw here. Maybe like a 2100 player or a 2000 player may have allowed me to escape with a draw. But someone like Glenn is very good in the technical sense. And one of the things they say, one of the sayings I once read was, good technique is good calculation. And this is exactly a good example of this. The white has calculated all these lines with f5. He sees the move f5. He calculates all the lines. He realizes it's winning. He saw the move knight c7, queen g4. He calculates that as well. So really good technique is good tactics and is good calculation. So he plays the move f5. I suddenly realise, well, I'm absolutely hopelessly lost here. I went queen f5. Now he can play knight c7. And in fact, I resigned because after rook e7, I think, if memory serves me correctly, well, he's got several ways to win it, but probably the simplest way is simply to take on e6. And if I go rook e6, he goes rook e1. And after king f7, he can exchange and go into a technically winning ending. And if I take with the queen, we've got probably the most depressing endgame in history after rook a1. Well, it's completely lost. He's just going to go a5 and b4. It's not even depressing, it's just completely lost. So, pardon me. Yeah, so that was quite an interesting game. It was a good example of how I sort of didn't use my time wisely at certain moments. And most importantly of all, I did not check my variations. Always check your variations. This is a very important point. And you should have backups as well to your main line. You should have like a backup to your main line. If your main line is wrong, if your main move is wrong, you should have a backup. So you should always have backups to your backups. And yeah, always check everything.